Sindoor made it.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. President Trump says time is running out for Iran to negotiate a nuclear agreement as US forces build up in the Gulf. Iran warns it will respond forcefully to any attack and insists its program is peaceful. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer meets President Xi Jinping as Britain seeks to reset economic ties with China. Starmer also holds talks with Premier Li Qiang and other senior leaders. The FBI executes a search warrant at a Georgia election facility tied to probes into 2020 vote claims. Authorities say it is a court-authorized law enforcement action. President Trump warns Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey over refusing to enforce federal immigration laws. Activists say deportation rates continue despite talk of de-escalation. A plane crash in northeast Colombia kills all 15 on board, including a local lawmaker. The aircraft loses contact minutes after departing Calcutta for a short flight to Ocana. Russian drone attacks in southern Ukraine kill 3 people, according to regional authorities. The strikes hit overnight as the war continues. Fed Chair Jerome Powell calls a Supreme Court case over Trump's effort to fire a Fed governor a historic threat. Powell says he believes the central bank will remain independent. Southeast Asian foreign ministers gather to address South China Sea tensions and the Myanmar war. The talks set ASEAN's agenda under Philippine chairmanship. Those are the headlines, but we start in East Asia, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer met Chinese President Xi Jinping today in Beijing, signalling a possible reset in relations after years of tension. China's President Xi Jinping has called for a reset in relations with Britain during talks with Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Beijing today. Xi said past Labour governments played an important role in developing UK-China ties. He called for more dialogue, describing it as imperative, and said recent years had seen twists and turns that did not serve either country. Xi added China is ready to build a long-term, consistent strategic partnership with the UK. Starmer said he came to office promising to make Britain face outward again. He said he is in the China with British people in mind, calling China a vital global player. The UK Prime Minister said both sides must build a more sophisticated relationship. Joining us now to discuss this is Collins Chong-Yu-Keat, a foreign affairs, security and strategy analyst, joining us live from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Of course, this comes as we've seen multiple Western leaders visit Beijing over the past month or so. The likes of Canada, Ireland, France and others have visited Beijing or met with Chinese leadership. Keir Starmer just the latest in a flurry of them. What are both sides looking to get out of this deal? What would be a win for London and what would be a win for Beijing here?
Well, we have seen how this is a recalibration by Britain towards more of a pragmatic engagement with China, especially in terms of consolidating economic fallback options with China. We have seen how the UK calculus in terms of this facing of this structural economic pressure, slowing growth, investment gaps, and post-Brexit trade constraints, and of course also with some strained ties with the US in terms of economic disagreements. We have seen how China remains a pivotal fallback option for all of these countries, including the UK, including Canada and France, and this is also being seen as a subtle protest message with with the Trump administration, but we have also seen how this is also being strategically capitalized upon by Beijing in terms of showing this narrative that despite the efforts by Washington to further constrain Beijing, we have seen how we have seen this noticeable drift by other Western partners to have this selective re-engagement with China, and that so we have seen also the some of the constraints that despite these efforts by both sides, by London and Beijing, to renew ties, especially on economic terms, we would not expect some breakthroughs in terms of sensitive issues, including on human rights, security cooperation, and technology controls, because the UK still remain being bound by these obligations with the Western system, including the Five Eyes intelligence pact, and also the US pressure on sensitive sectors on AI, semiconductors, and all that. So this is more about economic pragmatism, and this is also in line with the current momentum of seeking greater friendshoring efforts, and China still remains one of the most important markets for these countries. And it's a strategic hedging move by Britain, also being seen by Canada and France. But of course, Beijing is using all the means now to showcase to the world, and of course to showcase to global South and also to the Western partners that despite all the moves, China still retains the ultimate leverage on providing these important platforms for these countries.
And what about security implications, Collins? How will this affect UK policy on Taiwan, the South China Sea, and technology restrictions, if at all?
Well, as I've stated, I don't see any major realignments on these issues. I know the UK will still remain firmly in line with the narratives and the norms being set by the Western systems and the rules-based order. Of course, also the strategic norms and pressure being set by the Trump administration in terms of these sensitive topics and areas with regards to security implications, and Taiwan and South China Sea. And we have seen how the UK has also increased its power presence in the Indo-Pacific, especially also in Southeast Asia, and also in the Taiwan Strait. But of course, with this visit, these issues will not be seen as likely to implicate, further strains of the ties, and of course, both sides will not want to use this as a pretext. And of course, I foresee that the UK also will still, remain pragmatically intact in terms of engaging more in the economic sectors, but also setting red lines as to what will constitute, violation of the rules-based order. And of course, I think this will also be used by Beijing to further consolidate its red lines on Taiwan. But I don't foresee, any kind of strategic recalibrations by both sides on these issues, especially in regards to Taiwan and South China Sea and other, conflicts. And what we can see is that the more focus will be put on fortifying economic cooperation, and the UK also will use this to push Beijing and President Xi further on the issue of Ukraine and other issues. But on Taiwan and South China Sea, I don't see that as a prominent topics to be discussed for now.
And how close of tabs do you think Washington will be keeping on this meeting? Of course, as we've said previously, it's been a plethora of countries which have visited and at least had these significant meetings with Chinese officials over the past few weeks. Do you think Washington is concerned by this, or is this just more normality in terms of engagement with China from the West?
Well, I don't see that this is, a profound concern for the Trump administration. It's an expected move, by the UK as well as also by France and Canada, and ties have not been in the best lately, as we have seen, and this is expected, of course, for these countries to consolidate their own national interests, their hedging, capacities, and their strategic fallback options, and of course being seen also as a subtle move, as a messaging for the Trump administration that despite the importance being placed on the US as being the ultimate security partner, these countries still retain the autonomy, the hedging capacity to also include China in the order of consolidating their economic capacities. And of course, we've seen how this all these moves have been expected also by the Trump administration, but I don't see this, to remain high on the agenda of, rectifying, the transatlantic ties. So I know Washington is well aware of the need of these nations, but as I've stated, the Trump administration has the ultimate leverage on almost all fronts with regards to ties with Europe, especially with the UK. And like it or not, Britain still retains the ultimate need to rely on Washington on the security support system. But on the economic front, China is being seen as the needed partner for now, at least in the near-term capacity, to show up this weakening growth structure of Britain, and hence we have seen this move.
Okay, Collins, do stay with us as we move on to our next story. And we turn to the Middle East, and Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned that the country's armed forces are prepared to respond forcefully to any US military operation with quote-unquote fingers on the trigger to defend Iran's land, sea and air. However, Araghchi did not rule out a new nuclear deal, stating that Iran has always welcomed a fair, mutually beneficial agreement free from coercion to ensure peaceful nuclear technology. The US president has announced the deployment of a massive armada to the region, or what he calls, adding to growing tensions. The US continues to weigh its options, with military action potentially on the table. Iran's crackdown on protesters has resulted in around 6,200 deaths, and US allies, including Germany and France, are pushing for tougher sanctions on Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Collins joins us once again. Collins, how should we interpret Iran's simultaneously threatening force and, of course, also floating openness towards a possible new nuclear deal?
Well, it is, a deliberate theatrical move, and we've seen how also this is to ensure that it still retains the leverage with regards to this timeline of these tensions with the US, and whether this strategic move of to escalate things to actually to de-escalate matters. So escalate to de-escalate strategy, whether it is impactful, being used by both sides, by Washington and Tehran. Of course, we've seen how this is also one of the classic Iranian doctrine to raise costs rhetorically, in rhetoric terms, to avoid actual wars, especially when facing these new moves by the Trump administration in terms of a show of force, a classic projection of power, of strength. And of course, now we have seen how Iran is strategically cornered and constrained in terms of the moves by the US across all platforms, including sanctions, including regional containment, the weakening of the Iranian proxies in the region, and of course also to signal resolve to domestic audiences and to deter any preemptive US action. But I don't foresee that this move is actually beneficial, and it might backfire. We've seen how once President Trump has stated his red line and his warning, and as in the case of Venezuela, and this has precedent. We have seen how last year this limited attack on Iran, and now again with this renewed warning. And also, there's not much has been done in terms of this killing of the protesters on the ground, and of course we have seen how the risk assessment now is more on miscalculation on both sides, and whether the responses, the escalate to de-escalate theater will be used to full effect by Tehran is yet to be seen. But now the ball is on the court of Iran. We have seen how President Trump has upped the ante. And of course, he has although without the full backing of some regional peers, some regional allies in the region, the sheer might of the entire hard power capacity by the US will prove to be too costly for the current regime in Tehran to fully ignore. And this is a miscalculation on the part of Tehran if he still feels that he has the capacity to have this kind of deterrence through this rhetorical approach alone. Thomas.
Indeed. Collins, do stay with us as we move on to our next story. US federal immigration agents, two of them involved in the fatal shooting of a protester in Minneapolis have been placed on administrative leave. US Customs and Border Protection confirmed on Wednesday a standard procedure after officer-involved shootings as investigations proceed. The move comes amid national backlash over the death of ICU nurse Alex Pretti, who was shot multiple times by Border Patrol agents during a federal enforcement operation in the city. Pretti's death, the second fatal shooting involving federal immigration forces in Minnesota this month, has sparked widespread outrage and protests, drawing criticism from city and state officials who argue federal response has been heavy-handed. In the midst of controversy, Justice Department officials have also announced charges against protesters alleged to have assaulted federal officers, even as calls for independent reviews of the incident grow. Okay, of course, this comes as Donald Trump signals de-escalation in the city of Minnesota after protests grew over the killing of 2 individuals and the injuring of 1. All incidents of which happened with firearms by ICE agents. Joining us now is Major General Dr. Rajan Kochar, an international relations expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Dr. Kochar, for joining us here on the program. Of course, when we saw these killings happen, we saw the likes of Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Chief, also the likes of Dan Bovino, who was in charge of the operations in the city. We saw them defend those ICE agents. We saw before an investigation had even started, let alone concluded. Now that these agents have been put on leave, does that signal the Trump administration conceding that indeed these ICE agents might have done something irresponsibly?
Good morning, Thomas. Thank you for inviting me over for this discussion. Generally, this step of administrative leave is seen as a routine step. Normally, it's not a step in which criminal charges have been levied on these 2 agents. So I think basically it is to stabilize this situation in Minnesota, because things have gone out of hand. The people have come on the streets, large scale protests are there. So I think this is part of the damage control exercise, and changing of the chief also of the Homeland Security also is a step in that direction, though of course it's not going to change much on ground, because the point here is the methodology of going about the entire process has to be streamlined. It has to be transparent, because what we have seen in all the incidents which have taken place, and this is not an isolated incident, it's an incident which has happened in California, Portland, other places also. 2-3 patterns are actually emerging in these incidents. The recent incidents suggest that the states which are not Republican are being targeted for this kind of a treatment. The second is that there is no transparency involved, or there is no methodology involved. After all, there's always a method in the madness also, as they say. But I don't see this kind of a thing happening, because people who are getting picked up that are suggesting that they were innocent, in the sense that they didn't have that kind of immigrant record to suggest that they should be arrested. A second important aspect is we have to understand whatever security organization it may be, Homeland Security or state police, you cannot treat your citizens like criminals, because what we are seeing is this type of incident which has happened. It is suggesting that the law enforcement authority is considering itself to be above the law. They have to function within the parameters of the law, and that is what the judicial process will also bring out. and a proper investigation if it is held, because I'm also too not too sure. I'm a bit skeptical about the way the investigation will bring out the complicity of these two guards who have been put on a kind of administrative leave. But Trump would be quite concerned now because the kind of backlash, and this backlash is not restricted to Minnesota, because if you see, these protests have spread to other parts of the country also, and with those primaries also coming in, I think it's cause of worry for Trump. He will have to soften down on this, and already some signs we are already seeing, as you said. Trump has started softening down, and I think in due course of time, I personally feel that there should be some kind of a change seen in this process, the way the immigrants are being rounded up, and the way the illegal immigrants identification is being organized.
Indeed, and of course this comes as Tom Homan arrives in the state after Bovino has been removed. Homan, of course, the border czar, who has a slightly controversial past, but of course Kristi Noem's and Bovino's actions have been vastly opposed by a lot of the American public. What kind of approach here do you think will be possibly different, given the fact that, of course, this is the operations here have caused widespread disorder throughout both the state and, of course, opposition from all around the country?
See, if I was in his shoes, if I was to be there now, since I've been appointed, he has been appointed. So the first approach would be that he would like to send a message loud and clear to all his law enforcement officers that the intelligence or the verification of the people whom you are going after must be foolproof, and it's extremely important that the right kind of people are targeted, and the common citizens are not harassed, because that should be his first approach, to see that a proper intelligence network is established, and on the basis of correct information only actions need to be taken. Second aspect is, I would also if I was in his place, I would also like to co-opt the state police in my kind of an action, that when these, for example, I give you of Jammu and Kashmir, and it's an example of a similar kind, that whenever we carry out an operation, or whenever we want to go into a civil area, or when we want to tackle the civil population, a representative of the Jammu and Kashmir police is always there with the Indian Army. So this kind of approach, I think, is going to reap good dividends, because the moment you involve the state administration to some extent, because I think he would be constrained not to involve them everywhere, but wherever there is a lingering doubt, or there is something which needs proper verification, I think the local authorities also need to be consulted, especially the local state machinery. And the third important aspect is transparency, because whatever you do, you must carry out a proper media briefing after that, and you must inform the public that what kind of actions or operations have been undertaken, and what has been the outcome of the operation, and what is the evidence available with you, and why have you targeted a particular person. So these three things, I think, should be the most important. One is intelligence, one is cooperation, and the third is transparency. Because once you are able to get these things in place, I think to a large extent this controversies would get avoided.
Dr. Kochhar, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to get your input. We now move on to Latin America, and a plane crash in northeast Colombia has killed 15 people, including a local lawmaker. The plane operated by Sercar lost contact with air traffic control 12 minutes after departing from Cucuta for a short flight to Ocana. The president of Setena, Oscar Zalugala, has confirmed the loss of 13 passengers and 2 crew members. Let's listen in to what Zalugala and others had to say.
Lamento informar que una aeronave tipo Beechcraft de la empresa Searca, que cubría la ruta Cúcuta-Ocaña, sufrió un accidente fatal. Esta aeronave transportaba 13 pasajeros y 2 tripulantes. Lamentablemente, el balance es la pérdida de 15 vidas.
Estamos en el proceso de recopilación de evidencias y datos para hacer un análisis y poder identificar factores contribuyentes o tener evidencias factuales para poder desarrollar una línea de investigación con respecto a la aeronave, a la operación, a las condiciones meteorológicas, que en este caso tenemos identificadas unas condiciones meteorológicas adversas permanentes en el sitio del.
Se está disponiendo una sala para la atención a familiares, para que allí puedan acercarse, puedan obtener información oficial de primera mano. Queremos que las familias puedan al menos tener esta tranquilidad de que va a ser atendido cualquier requerimiento de su parte de manera prioritaria e inmediata. Y también nos han informado que el desplazamiento de los cuerpos se va a realizar a la ciudad de Cúcuta.
Nvidia, Amazon and Microsoft are in advanced talks to invest up to $60 billion in OpenAI. Nvidia is already a key investor in OpenAI and is looking to commit $30 billion. Meanwhile, Microsoft, a long-time backer and exclusive distributor of OpenAI's models, is negotiating to add less than $10 billion. According to reports, Amazon, which has not previously invested, is in talks for a substantial investment, possibly surpassing $20 billion. This potential influx of capital is expected to provide OpenAI with even more resources as it continues to expand its AI capabilities. The companies involved are yet to confirm the statements. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.